Good evening. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that those of you who are just joining in at least got to catch the tail end of that video. The gentleman started off by saying, "Before you call the cops, please get to know me." So today we're going to have a very poignant discussion about race and race relations here in this country, and specifically about what has been happening in our city. You may be joining me from all across the country, but I'm located in Rochester, New York, in upstate New York. New York has been the hotspot for the pandemic, and we have also experienced some of what you have seen in the news in Minneapolis and all across the country. My guest today is Dr. Ashley Cross. She is a local pastor here. She is my pastor. And I think she has a lot of expertise and information that she can share. And we're just going to have a discussion. We're going to have a discussion as two African-American women living and experiencing the world as it is today in this country. And as women of African-American or wives of African-American men, we are also experiencing it there. So I am going to bring Dr. Cross on stage. She's going to join me. Dr. Cross, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hi, LaShonda.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being here today. And I want to say to those of you who are watching, please feel free to engage in this discussion, in this conversation with us. We'd love to hear your comments, your questions. We'd love to for you to share your experiences as well. This is not necessarily a conversation just for Black folk. If you are of a different race, we hope to engage you in this dialogue so that we can go to a place of healing and we can begin to see the change that African Americans across the country and those who are not African American but have served as allies for us have been crying for some time. So the first thing I want to talk about is the trauma that folks are experiencing now. There's something quite different about the George Floyd video that we've all watched. And personally, I knew and understood that I was feeling trauma, experiencing trauma in a different way than maybe I have ever before, because as I was thinking about and trying to process all of what was happening in the country, I was also thinking about and remembering being in a home full of domestic violence, watching my mother be beat at times, and the physical response that I was having with regard to what's happening in our country now, with regard to that video that I saw, was identical to the feelings that I had as a little girl, helpless and at times feeling hopeless. What are your thoughts about the psychological impact that Black people are experiencing right now because of this and because of racism generally?
Yeah, LaShonda, I think that we have all been exposed to some level of trauma by watching these videos year after year after year. And, you'll see that there are times on Facebook where somebody will say, take care of yourself, don't watch these videos, trigger warning. But that doesn't change the fact that we watch them, we see them, we're exposed to them. And every single one, I know for me personally, every single one has hit so different. They've hit so different. I think the thing that we've seen with George Floyd is it was almost as if he was stripped of his humanity. We watched life be sucked out of him for nearly 9 minutes. And so we're talking about 9 minutes of trauma and 9 minutes of being able to relate to him, moments of feeling like our dignity was being stripped, feeling of helplessness, being in situations where we felt like we were pinned to the ground, where we were like, I wanted to get out of that, but I couldn't. So all of those things, as you're watching that, you're having all of this undealt with trauma, soul issues, all these different things start to kind of manifest within yourself. And like you, I grew up in a home with domestic violence. I didn't realize it was domestic violence until I got to college. And the reason I did not realize that was because my mom always fought back. Like she wasn't just like, so I was like, well, it ain't really domestic violence. She's throwing swing. She's like, she's not just laying down and taking it. But it was still unhealthy. And it still taught me kind of like, I jump. I don't like when people yell. Like there are certain things I'm like, hey, don't do that. And so George was different for us. And I think that for me as a mother now, it created a different type of almost a fear. And I don't like to admit that, but that's what it is. It's a different level of fear because we all heard that big Black man cry out for his mom in his last moments of life,
Yeah.
And so, that is what we're seeing even, and I know we'll talk more about this, even with the riots and the looting, we're seeing a manifestation of undealt with trauma. We're seeing that. And that's why you're having Americans like, this isn't the way to do this. But it's like most Black people haven't even started the process of healing. You guys are asking for people to respond in a way that they haven't been in environments. They haven't been given the tools necessary to have a different response.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in addition to being a Black woman and being married to a Black man, I have a Black son, a young Black son, 26 years old. He lives in New York City in the Bronx, and he came to visit us last week, stayed with us for a week. Later one evening, as he was visiting, he had commented about a run he had gone on earlier that morning. And I felt a physical response in my body. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad he didn't tell me he was going on a run. And so we have had to deal with that psychological trauma that has come from feeling that fear that you talked about. We don't want fear to grip us. Many of us, you and I, are believers, and we put our trust in Jesus Christ. And at the same time, there's something right in our faces every single day that is reminding us of our lack of safety in many cases. I want to share a comment that James Warder has made. He says, how do we speak with our children about not being reactionary, but not hiding their feelings? Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So, it's funny, James. I was just telling my husband the other day how grateful I am that our daughter is too young to need that conversation right now. She's still 2. So we have time to kind of figure out how we're going to introduce her to this, how we're going to talk to her about this. Yeah. I think that children need a safe place to be angry. They need a safe place to say, I'm scared, I'm angry. They need a safe place to say, I don't trust police officers. I get scared when I see a police officer. They need a safe place within their home, and they need both their mothers and they need their fathers to be able to respond and help them process that. That's a true pain. It's a real fear, and children fear it. I remember we were driving back from Kansas one time, and I had a car full of foster girls, and it was 4th of July weekend when Philandro was murdered. Driving back on the 5th. And as soon as we got pulled over, one of my foster daughters said, oh shoot, we about to die. Like that was her first reaction. And I said, she is so afraid of police officers that every single time they're coming, and we were harassed. And so I even when we were done with him and after he did all, I was like, I don't even know what to tell her now. But I think that we have to own the fact that our children are scared, and we have to help for them to process that pain in a way. But we have to make sure that our children, that we talk to them about being compassionate. We talk to them about not being judgmental. You know what I mean? But that is a conversation that depending on where they're at developmentally, not even age, just developmentally, how old they are, how mature they are, then that's when you start to talk to them about, hey, this is the country that we live in.
Yeah, absolutely.
That are put up, and this is what's happening. You talk to them about their history.
Yeah, that is so important. As I was preparing for this talk and just kind of reviewing many historical events and facts that have happened, I thought to myself, no one taught me this. There was no history classes or any teachers who spoke this. No, there was a lot of information that wasn't even passed down from generation to generation about who we are as people. And that's a really critical piece that I think that parents can do. They can really begin to study our history, understand our history, and teach their children and begin the storytelling of our ancestors, the passing down of that wisdom that we have seen to have lost over time. My daughter had the opportunity to take a Pan-African class before graduating from School of the Arts, and she wants to join the revolution, you know? That sparked something in her. It sparked a sense of pride and a sense of connection to her people and to her heritage that she had not really expressed before. So I was really grateful that she had that experience.
And I think that there has to be a balance between that. Like, we want to raise our children to know the nasty parts of our history. But we also, one thing that I wish that my parents would have focused on is just the beauty of being Black. Like, you know, what does that mean? You know, what does it mean to be Black? I wish I knew more about Africa. I wish I knew more about our ancestors, you know, our culture, things of that sort. So now I'm 32 years old trying to play catch up. Like, I want to know these things, you know. I tell people all the time, and this is me being fully transparent. It was sometime, it was around the time that Mike Brown was murdered. I was on my way to just having a horrible mindset. Like, he was the one that would just kind of like, I was like, oh, we don't know what he did. I think he may have robbed that store. Like, that was me. And through just different experiences, I was like, I don't think this has anything to do with them being right or wrong. I think they're going to end up dead either way. And was it justified? That, you don't, it's not justifiable. It never is.
That's right.
So yeah, I wish that I was raised a little bit more to understand Black culture and Black history.
Yes, that balance is so key. And like you said, or like I was trying to express, is being able to understand who we are and where we came from, and the descendancy from kings and queens, and the beauty that came with the African culture, and being able to highlight that for our youth. I saw a post on Facebook the other day that asked the question, when did you first experience racism? And I'm going to want you to answer that question. But for me, I honestly wasn't fully aware of racism until my freshman year in college. And I know for many people that's maybe hard to believe, but I went from the inner city. I was always around Black folk, you know, and my family is Black, and I went to Black schools and worked in organizations downtown where mostly other Black people worked and shopped. And my freshman year in college, I was fully thrust into racism because I was now attending a predominantly Black institution, a predominantly white institution. And my freshman year, some of the gentlemen thought it would be fun to spray paint the N-word on the bathroom walls. And that was my welcome wagon to college. Now, I will tell you, it took everything in me to even be able to go to college. And to be accepted into it. And that was the welcome wagon. And so, of course, like many, you start to believe and internalize those thoughts that I don't belong here. I don't belong here. And I'm just so grateful for people like Dr. Arlette Miller-Smith, who begin to hold conversations and provide books for us to read, like Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria? So we can begin to have these dialogues and remind us that we did belong there, regardless of how some people felt about us being there. We earned our space there and we belong there. And it's so unfortunate that so many of our young people encounter experiences like that, and then they begin to really believe the things that people say about them, and they abort their destiny as a result. Yeah.
And I'm going to give you two short examples. One, it was more of a of a passive racism that I didn't even realize. It was in the 3rd grade. I went to an elementary school called Vassar Elementary School in Aurora, Colorado. And I was the only Black girl, a Black kid in my class and probably the school. And I used to have a hard time with my hair. I have Black hair. And I would try to do different things with it. So the white girls in the class used to make fun of my hair. So I would just sit there and I wouldn't want to talk. Like I didn't engage or anything. And the teacher tried to really push me out of the class. She told my mom I needed special ed. And luckily my mom knew me. My mom has always been an amazing advocate for me, but I could see how that could have went the wrong way. Like the teacher didn't stop the girls from making fun of me. She heard them make fun of me. It was racial. They were making fun of my hair, but instead of dealing with that, she was just like, I think she has learning disability. And my mom was like, yeah, we're going to move, But I just think about what if they would have put me on medicine and all this other stuff, like they do a lot of our Black kids, definitely our Black boys.
Absolutely.
But the time that I experienced, and it was so blatant, was in college. My brother, he was actually hanging out with a white girl, and he was kind of interested in her. And her mother, who was actually a professor at my college, emailed her daughter just a disgusting letter, just saying, you are going to ruin your life by engaging with this young man. And my brother went to this college on a full ride academic scholarship. So it's like she was calling him a thug. She was saying how she's going to mess up her credit and her future, and how basically they're going to stop paying for her college and supporting her if she continued to hang out with my brother. But even when Obama won the elections, I went and locked myself in my dorm room. I had to leave the cafeteria and go straight to my dorm room because it was a private Christian college. But campus was in an uproar. It was in an uproar.
Wow. Zach, I want to pull this question up on the screen. Zach, what are a few specific and tangible things that non-African American allies can do on a regular basis to help stand up against racism and/or help prevent African Americans in our communities from being targeted by police and racists?
Yep. There are 2 things. One, Zach, Zach is my guy. We actually went to the same college. So one of the things, Zach, is using your white privilege. Using your white privilege. Even in George Floyd's case, I couldn't help but to wonder if the white lady that was standing right there would have at least pushed the police officer, because he wasn't going to shoot her dead. If that would have saved his life. Use your privilege in those instances. Conversations about race are nice, but 1, they're exhausting, and 2, if you don't take any action after that, it's not helpful. But the other one is to confront your own implicit biases. Like, we all have them, and many of them came from our parents and the way that we were raised. But confront your own bias about Black and brown people. Those are 2 of the things. But I'm telling you, using that white privilege and not protecting your racist friends. I've seen that happen a few times on my Facebook, where somebody will blatantly say some type of racist comment. Black people will start coming for them, and the white person that owns the post will take it down. And I'm like, oh, you're trying to protect them because they look racist, because they are in this, they are. So those are just some things. Like, don't be afraid to lose friends. Don't be afraid to have those hard conversations. If you have people in your family and in your circle that are racist, that say ignorant things, that have harmful mindsets about Black people, say something.
Yeah, absolutely. I often hear people say, white people say, I don't see color. And I don't think that people recognize how damaging a statement like that is, and how it really dilutes the movement. And if you don't see color, you don't see me. Actually had a dialogue with someone who I would consider to be an ally today on Facebook about a comment I put up regarding this statement. And one of the things that I often see white people do in an attempt to sort of show that they're an ally, they go to their what's called the right to comfort. And it really is an aspect of privilege. The fact that you can remove yourself from a conversation, you can make statements like, well, I wasn't a slave owner. That had nothing to do with me, those kinds of things. It really is taking responsibility for what's happening in this country. And as you say, using your privilege. Let's get away from this notion that I'm a good white person and that I'm trying, and really demonstrate that through some of the actions that you just suggested, by using your privilege, by standing in the way of a white cop and a Black person, by talking to those racist friends and family members and making sure that they know that in your presence, that kind of language won't be tolerated.
Yeah. And the whole I don't see color, and even the all police aren't bad, those are all very dismissive statements. It's just your way to try to redirect the conversation. It's your way to try to deflect and dismiss the fact that this is a real issue and it hurts. You know, the whole I don't see color thing is basically saying that you don't see differences, which means that you're not able to accept differences. So you have to be colorblind to accept me as a Black woman, is what you're telling me. You can't see me as a Black woman and still love me, still accept me, still see me as your equal. And so for me, it's almost racist saying that, because you're saying, like, if I did see color, then there would be a problem, but I don't. You know, it doesn't make sense. See my color and accept it.
So the president would say things like, the news media is inflaming this conversation. And I've heard other people say that. And I don't think that people quite recognize that Blacks have been assaulted, beat, raped, been utilized as property since we were brought to this country. It just wasn't televised at that point. And so what would you say to people who are of that same mindset, that this is just somehow, it seems like it's more prevalent, but it's really not. It's just social media fanning the flames.
Yeah, once again, it's dismissive. It's saying that systemic racism and oppression and white privilege and white supremacy does not exist. You're basically telling us what we're seeing is not real. It's an illusion, and we're all delusional. Like, you know, the media wasn't around during slavery, but we know it existed. So if that's the case, I mean, we know it exists. So no, I do believe that sometimes the media does make things worse, you know, and that, you know, where we see 10-second sound bites is when I say, I want to hear the whole interview, But no, the media is not making this up. They're not making this up. But when you, like, if you go to Fox, you'll see, you know, a different narrative than you will on CNN. That's why it's so important to look at every single kind of sector of it. So even when I'm on Facebook, I don't just get all of my information from one media source. I want to see who else is saying it. What do their pictures look like? Because this picture of a whole bunch of Black people looting, but this one over here shows some white women walking out of Target with some lamps. So, you know, so you have to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, seriously. And when we have been seeing everything that's on the news, oftentimes people equate the peaceful protests to the rioters, which is not necessarily the same. They're not one and the same. People also don't notice that there are these folks who are professional agitators, that they have been planted in various cities in these peaceful protests to really incite and invoke havoc. And but somehow that's going to come back to us as Black people, or somehow we are associated with the rioting. It really is a disgusting narrative.
Yep. And you have to think about this, LaShonda. I remember growing up thinking that the Black Panthers was like a hate group. Until I did my research and realized, wait, no, they were here to protect us. You know, so once again, the media and the way that we have been given our history You
Mhm.
know, I've never read a positive narrative in a history book about the Black Panthers, or the way that the teacher at least presented it. It
Right.
wasn't who they really were. You know,
Mhm.
so now I'm sitting here and I'm talking to my husband and I'm like, we need kind of some security in these, so that,
Yeah.
you know, during this peaceful protest, when you do get white supremacists that come, we have some men that are willing to, if they need to, kind of get rough to redirect them, you
Mhm.
know, away from the peaceful protest.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
you start to see your history and you start to say, man, this makes sense. And I was definitely introduced to this
Mm.
in the wrong way.
Right, right. So David says, what message would you have for our schools, both in Rochester and in Monroe County, to better educate students on the realities of ingrained systemic racism?
Yeah, I'm sure that there are educators that can better answer that question, but I think that there needs to be some curriculum that is specifically designed around some of these topics. There need to be some classes that all people, like it. We should not have African American history as an elective.
Right,
Because only Black kids are signing up to take it because
right,
they want to learn about their history. You know,
right.
we need curriculum that is required for every student to take, that talks about inequity, that talks about, you know, the issues of systemic racism, you know, and we need to make sure that the whole picture, the whole story is told. Um,
Absolutely.
so those are some of the things that I think. I'm like I said, I'm sure there is some educator that can answer that on a much more detailed level. But I think that we need to start actually using the word racism.
Yeah.
We need to start using the word white privilege and white fragility. We need to have books and curriculum
Mhm.
that are written by Black people.
Mhm.
You know, all of those different things, so that our students are culturally competent.
Absolutely. Black history is American history. And that's what so many
Mhm.
people forget. It's somehow only intended for other Black students to learn about their own history and culture. And
Mhm.
therefore, because white students are not a part of the conversation, we
Right.
see this perpetuated. So
Yep.
that would be some of my suggestions as well, that it really needs to be ingrained and embedded throughout the entire curriculum of the school. It needs to be a regular conversation. There need to be safe space. And then the culture of the teaching population as well should be reflective of the student population that is there. And everyone has to be a part of the conversation, and everyone has to have a role in making sure that we dispel these hateful narratives that are, again, perpetuated from generation to generation.
Yep. And I think that there's a way to ingrain it in a way to where our courses begin to align. It's
Mhm.
not just history classes that should be teaching about Black issues. It's
Right.
not just, you know, your ELA, your language classes can
Mhm.
be using articles where you know, the things that you guys are reading and writing essays on can be Black poems and things of that sort. You know, your math class, when you're taking a statistics class, use this as a time to teach people about descriptive or deceptive statistics.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
let's read this article and let's see if this makes sense. You know, let's learn about statistics that, you know, are to drive us towards a certain narrative or belief system.
Yeah. Absolutely. Juanita has a great question. How do we have these conversations in the marketplace? What is appropriate versus not to talk about at work?
Yeah, I think the marketplace is hard because this is where you really need.
Politics and races,
It
conversations you stay away from, seems like.
It is, and it's hard because right now everybody is looking at each other in these Zoom meetings or at work, and everybody's looking like, "So how are you?" But you don't know if they're saying, "Well, how am I for real?" or "How am I just in general?" But you know, I think that if everybody goes in with the mindset that I'm trying to kind of understand your perspective, ask a lot of questions. Ask a lot. You start off with just asking questions,
Mhm.
and you have to begin debunking myths.
That's right.
Challenge people in their thought processes. You know, it doesn't have to be super combative. It doesn't have to feel like it's in an argument. But how did you learn that? Who taught you that? You know,
Mhm.
what kind of household did you grow up? Okay, well, that will kind of make sense why this is your thought process towards this. but you know, I don't think that the marketplace is one of those places where you can still decide to turn a blind eye on
Right.
racist comments. You
Absolutely.
know, I think you still have to, in a very professional way, call out racism amongst your peers and your colleagues. And if it's a supervisor that you need to pull aside and say, hey, when you said this, it really rubbed me the wrong way for these reasons, you
Mhm.
know, and if it continues, then this, I would have to go up the chain of command. You know, we
Yeah.
have to deal with it because if not, it will continue as a cycle.
Absolutely. And not just the outright the blatant racist comments, but even the subtle things.
Mhm.
There was a position that I was applying for at one point, and with every Black woman that's watching this now, know that hair is always a subject of conversation, particularly if you're in the corporate marketplace. And
Right.
I had this very wild hair. It was kinky, it was red, it was big, it was loud. You saw it coming around the corner before you saw me. And I loved everything about it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I very much so love being a Black girl, just being
Yeah.
able to be diverse with my hairstyles. And someone who I considered a friend, a peer, an ally, said to me, it might not be good for you to wear that hair because you probably won't get this job. In so many words, that was not a direct quote from
Mhm.
them, but but I knew the message, and many of us have heard that message before. You know, fix that, straighten it, talk different, walk different, act different, so that we know you belong here and we can open up the door for you. That has probably been the most prevalent experiences that I've had in the marketplace with regard to racism, just people really trying to ensure that you as a Black person conform to the norm of that
Yeah.
institution so that you fit in.
Yep. And that, I had to ask my husband the other day, like, what are we willing to lose over this?
Mm,
Because the more we talk about this, the more that certain people might not support us, certain things, certain opportunities might be stripped from us, you know. And so even in the same way, when we're talking about in the marketplace and we're talking about wanting a job, you know, Black people we cannot continue to be okay with conforming so that a door can open for us,
right.
you
Absolutely.
know. And so,
And that's why
yeah,
we need to open up our own doors. We need to
absolutely.
really begin to band together. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but I want to get to this question that Tia has posed. Tia, first of all, there's no stupid questions, so welcome to Epic Live. She wants to know, what is the best way for nonprofits to diversify their boards? The board she serves on is extremely white, and she wants to figure out how to change that.
Yeah, so talk to them about diversity amongst the board, that you feel that it is important. Straight, you can just straight up say that. You don't have to. I mean, that's an appropriate conversation. You know, I think that we need, you know, more voices represented at this table. And it really doesn't even matter what type of nonprofit it is. Every nonprofit needs diversity. We can't have a board room of all men, all women, all white people. We need, you know, to have some diversity.
Right.
But you can also ask them if there is a development committee or a nomination committee, or a nomination committee where you can serve on that to help recruit new board members.
Right.
I've actually recently done that, you know, on a board that I sit. I'm like, hey, can I kind of be over helping us get some new board members, you know, accepting, you know, some of the resumes and kind of helping with that process. So as a board member, it is one of your jobs anyway to kind of help with the governance and help onboard new board members.
Right.
So volunteer yourself to do that and start purposely kind of looking for Black people to serve on your board.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I would also say, Tia, find another white person on the board that is an ally and who thinks very similar to yours, because oftentimes these messages get silent, you know, they get squashed out because there's one person that's fighting this fight on their own. And so
Yeah.
if you have some other people that can help to raise this as an agenda item for that board, you're going to be able to go a lot further faster. So I would definitely recommend that. Janine says, what is an opportunity or appropriate, way to respond to the looting that took place in our community? I have some thoughts about that. Do you want to share?
You want me to share first?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So the looting and the rioting is a manifestation of trauma. It's a manifestation of anger, frustration, and pain. And so one thing you will not catch me doing is judging the looters and the rioters, because one, I don't know them all individually, and I don't know their motive and their pain, and I don't know how they were raised and what they've had access to. And so I will not judge them as a whole. And so that is the first thing, is you don't respond with judgment. You respond with compassion, like you would anything. And then, like, for instance, here in Rochester, we're number 3 in poverty in the nation. So for me, it wasn't a surprise. And you know what I mean? It's almost like, well, what did we think was going to happen? You know, with a bunch of angry people that are angry about their situation and angry with the fact that they feel hopeless. But then obviously the next day we responded with compassion by saying, this is still our city and let's go and restore it. Let's clean it up. But let's not pass judgment on the people that are doing this, because we don't know them and we don't know. I mean, I know that it looks like you see just all these people running out with Gucci and, you know, Jordan stuff. And so it's easy to just be like, they're in this for the wrong reasons and they just want, but it's a manifestation of something deeper. It's a manifestation of something deeper.
Absolutely. And there's, as you said, not only is there so much blame, but there is this thought that, well, the store owners, the businesses, they didn't deserve this. And no, they didn't deserve this. But Black people have also not deserved the experiences that they have had to have in this country. George Floyd didn't deserve to be killed, to be lynched in broad daylight with a badge. And so it really is not about who's right or who's wrong. It is about getting to the root of the issue. And if we talk only about the symptoms that we're experiencing, and believe me, rioting is a symptom of a larger root issue, which has been embedded in a history of systemic and structural racism. And so we have to address that. Otherwise, we will see this again, because history repeats itself over and over again. Rochester had the July 64 riots, and it was an outcry from people feeling disadvantaged, being oppressed, living in poverty. And here's the other thing that I want to bring up with regard to that. When we look around, I work for an organization that does neighborhood revitalization. And I can't even tell you how hard pressed it was to find a list of businesses in our neighborhood that are Black owned. The majority of businesses in our highly impoverished community are not Black owned. And those people, and please don't misunderstand, I am not justifying looting because of this, but it is a part of the issues, the systemic issues that we have. And many of those people who own the stores, who don't look like the people who live in that neighborhood, don't live in that neighborhood, don't give back to that neighborhood, are not a part of the fabric of that community. And many people are angry about that and hurting, and they don't really know how to solve it. And so reacting and rioting may be one expression of the deep hurt and anger and disappointment that you have with this country. And so I do think that it is a broader conversation that needs to be held, but there's some real issues that need attention in order for us not to see a repeat of that.
Right.
So James says, is there a need for additional organizing? Oh my goodness, yes. If so, how would you begin? If not, what would be your next steps for spreading a message? Dr. Cross, what would you say to that?
There is. I keep saying I'm newer to Rochester. I've been here for 4 years. Rochester is very different. I'm still learning about all of the the jewels, the hidden jewels of Rochester. And so this, I'm not to say I'm happy that this has happened, but this is really forcing me to start looking at other organizations and other people that are doing the work.
Yeah.
And so I'm starting to notice, like, there are leaders in place. There are people that have been doing this for a good amount of time. Not that I ever denied it. I just didn't know about it.
Yeah.
I do think that there is room, there's space, and there is a demand for a lot of these agencies and these communities and these initiatives to come together as one and start really having a larger impact. We can all do so much separately, but I think if we can get more leadership, more educators, more, people in the health field, and we all can get together and put our money together. I told somebody the other day, Black Wall Street is not impossible.
That's right.
The thing that it's going to take more than resources, more than strategy, more than good ideas, that the hardest thing and the thing that's really going to take is for us to be unified.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of a harder thing, because that's when we start to get into the heart and the motive of people, not just the brain and the education. Right. Somebody being educated, it's real easy to come up with some strategies, but once you start getting to the heart of the matter, that's where people have to put their personal agendas aside and say, you know what, you guys, our community is in crisis. It's been in crisis and we're tired of it. We're fed up. We're all going to put our egos aside and we're going to organize something so that we can start buying back what is ours. We can start owning what is ours.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we need to stop letting neighborhoods be gentrified. There's so much that needs to happen. So yes, I do think that there is a need for additional organizing in the community, but I also don't think that we are absent of it. I just think that, we just need some leaders to get together and to organize something a little bit more strategic.
Amen. And speaking of which, the church has a role to play in that. I know I've heard and I've seen so many posts that go and say, where are the church? Honestly, I think the people who make comments like that, they're not a part of any church. So that's why I'm asking where the church is, because the church is alive and well and is participating in this conversation. And everybody has a role to play in the revolution. What role would you say is that of the church during this time?
The church, we should be in the forefront of this. We should be in the forefront of this. We should be utilizing our voice, our platforms. We should be the initiators of bringing hope and healing into our community. We should have a language for what is happening. We should not be passive. We should not be quiet. But we should be unified, and we should be the people that people come to say, hey, I have an idea. The thing that the church is not meant to be, though, is the driving force of every single small entity. And I think that that's what people don't understand. One thing happens, people are like, where was the church? Well, we were there. We just did it this way, and so, yes, people find any reason to ask, where is the church? But they don't realize that a great amount of people that were out there cleaning up the community were people of faith. Mm-hmm. We don't come with shirts that say we are the church. Like, believers are stationed everywhere. We are everywhere. And you don't always know that you're speaking to somebody that is a part of the church. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I know in terms of our church, we have made it very clear that our church, we will be the leading voice. And we will be as engaged as we possibly can, as far as our voices allow us to go, as far as our resources allow us to go. If we have the capacity to do it, we will be there.
Amen. The church is the body of Christ, not the four walls. That's what you all have to remember. The church is the body of Christ. So I just have a couple of last questions for you. One of the things, as I was just recently doing some research, I find to be fascinating is that the pandemic of 1918 coincided with World War I. And also around the same time, the Tulsa Massacre took place. And so we are now almost repeating history. I feel like we're at a war of sorts. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and we are constantly seeing Black lives taken in our communities. And so one of the things that have always fascinated me is this idea of reparations. And of course, African Americans have not seen reparations in this country for slavery, for the Tulsa Massacre, for just everyday experiences that we have. And yet our Japanese brothers and sisters did receive reparations in the 80s because of being a part of the internment camps during World War II. And so this is just, if you don't know this history, go and look up this history, go and study this history, because it's all very fascinating, and it will help you to really better understand what we're experiencing now. What are your thoughts on reparations? Do you think that African Americans will ever see reparations in this country?
I don't know if we're going to see it for slavery. It would be nice. I think that I don't think I have enough faith right now in this nation, to be honest, and our leadership. You know, as long as our president is the sitting president, I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
You know, now I think that there could be some for 1921 race massacre, because it was a little more recent. There are still people that have lived through that are in Tulsa. Not as many, definitely not as many, but there we still know that there are. I mean, it was 99 years ago, so I think that it's a handful, if even any, that are still. But their children and their children's children are still alive, and that is a memory that's still very fresh in people's mind.
Yep, absolutely.
And so the 1921 race massacre, possibly. I would be very surprised if it ever happened for slavery. I think we deserve it, but I don't know that I don't have a whole lot of faith in our government sometimes to do very bold things like that.
Yeah. And you spoke to unity and us coming together. That's one thing that we could come together on and insist that those families who were impacted, the generations that are still around, receive those reparations. I feel like I'm just a part of the revolution. Y'all see my earrings? Today, I'm feeling all of my Blackness, and I'm ready to jump on the bandwagon with whoever is going to be starting this, or maybe I might have to start it myself. But at some point in this country, there needs to be a public acknowledgement of some of the things that have happened. And again, if you have not heard of the Tulsa Massacre, which was said to be one of the worst massacres and the losses of lives in U.S. history. 35 city blocks were burned that were Black-owned businesses, Black-owned homes. 10,000 Blacks were homeless as a result of that. And it is just...
And LaTonda, do you know that after that Black people actually rebuilt? And it was because of systemic racism that they could not continue their businesses.
Yeah.
They were not, nobody had insurance claims because they coined it as a riot instead of a massacre. And so insurance companies at that time did not pay for riots.
Yeah.
If it was a massacre, then it would have shown that it was a bloodshed, and we didn't start that. We didn't. But now in Tulsa, there's a Highway 75, that goes right through where Black Wall Street was. And so they chose to put up a highway that now divides South Tulsa and North Tulsa, which North Tulsa is where the riots happen, and that's where all the Black people are. So they put up a highway to further segregate the cities. Tulsa is highly segregated. By what side of town you live on, we can probably determine what color you are.
Wow. Well, this has been a really great discussion. I thank you so much for coming on. I want you to close with your thoughts about the historical context. Harper, your daughter, is just 2 years old, or will she be 3?
Yeah. She's 2. She'll be 3 in December. She's 2.5.
She'll be 3. And what do you think you will say to Harper when she's 30 years old and she has her own family? What would be the conversation you'll have with her about what happened in Rochester, what happened in this period of time?
Yeah, I would obviously have to go back a little bit further so she can understand the systemic racism that we were encountering at this time. I want Harper to know about mass incarceration. I want her to know about the race riots. I want her to know about the war on drugs that sent Black fathers to prison. I want for Harper to know that if there's not a Black man in the house, it more than likely isn't just because he doesn't want to be there or did not want to be there at the time. That our government has worked very hard in making sure Black men were not there.
Yeah.
Why is the requirement for Section 8 and so many other things that there not be a man in the home? You think about all of these different things. And so I want Harper to know, one, that our history it's been difficult. Mm-hmm. So I want her to know how hard we have had to work. Not even just starting with me, but before me, with my grandparents and their grandparents, how hard people have had to work to give her the life that she has. Yeah. We believe firmly in, building generational wealth. But one thing we don't believe in is building a legacy of privileged children that think that was easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Harper, I want for her to, be living a life where she's like, I had no idea that these are the things that my family had to go through. Right. I want her to see pictures of her father protesting, in 2020, and she's going to ask me where she was. And I was at home making you sandwiches and we were watching. And I was weeping. I'm weeping while I'm making you a sandwich because I can't believe that we're still where we are. Right. We're here again. I just, these are stories that my grandparents told me. I couldn't believe at that moment, listening to people chant Black Lives Matter, that I'm living the same thing that my grandmother was telling me about a few years ago. Right. And so I want to raise very compassionate children, but I want them to know that none of this came easy. None of this came easy. And so that's what I kind of think about. I want for Harper to know that we worked hard to create a better future for her. But I think that it's going to take us not falling back into our normal. I've been telling my husband, I don't want life to go back to normal. I don't want to be apathetic. I don't want to forget that this is a real issue for us. And so, we have to keep this in the forefront of our mind so that, if all four of these police officers are, let's say they all do go to prison. I don't want that to be like, all right, y'all, cool, we're done. Right. We have a lot of work to do. And everybody plays a part in this. Everybody plays a significant part. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for being here with me today. It was wonderful to have you. Thank you. You just tuned in. You have been watching Epic Live with Dr. Ashley Cross. And I am your host, LaShonda Leslie Smith. As she said, don't forget and don't go back to normal. We really have to play a part in the revolution, and everybody has a different role that they are playing during this time. But one thing we cannot do is forget and go back to business as usual. I thank you so much for joining us. Join me next week here every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. for Epic Live, where we discuss life and life more abundantly. I'm your host, LaShonda Leslie Smith. Have a good night.